Eruvin 67b. Even if it opens into an enclosure, this is considered its main entrance, rather than the one that opens into the alleyway. It is Rabbah and Rav Yosef who both say, the halakha in such a case depends on the identity of the owner of the courtyard. With regard to a courtyard owned by a Gentile, if the enclosure behind his courtyard is the size of 2 beit seah or less, he renders it prohibited for the Jewish residents of the alleyway to carry. An enclosure of this size is not large enough for all the Gentiles' needs, and therefore his main entrance is the one that opens into the alleyway. However, if the enclosure is greater than the size of 2 beit seah, he does not render it prohibited for the residents of the alleyway to carry, as such an enclosure is sufficient for all his needs. On the other hand, with regard to a courtyard owned by a Jew, if the enclosure is the size of 2 beit seah or less, he does not render it prohibited for the other residents of the alleyway to carry, even if he did not join in an Eruv with them, because he has the option of carrying in such an enclosure on Shabbat. He would not carry in the alleyway, as it is more convenient for him to carry in a place that belongs exclusively to him. However, if the enclosure is greater than the size of 2 beit seah, in which case it is prohibited to carry there, the Jew would carry only by way of the alleyway. Therefore he renders it prohibited for his fellow residents of the alleyway to carry unless he establishes an Eruv with them. With regard to this issue, Rav Bar Haklai raised a dilemma before Rav Huna. If the Gentile's courtyard opens into an alleyway, and it also has an entrance that opens into an enclosure, what is the halakha? He said to him, they have already said that if the enclosure is the size of 2 beit seah or less, the Gentile renders it prohibited for the Jewish residents of the alleyway to carry. However, if it is more than 2 beit seah, he does not render it prohibited for them to carry. Allah said that Rabbi Yohanan said, with regard to an enclosure greater than the size of 2 beit seah, that was not originally surrounded by a fence for the purpose of residence, even if it is as large as a field that produces a crop of 1 kor, and even 2 kor, one who inadvertently throws an object into it from the public domain is liable to bring a sin offering, like one who throws into a private domain. What is the reason for this? It is because the partition of an enclosure is a valid partition. Consequently, the enclosure is considered a private domain by Torah law, except that it is lacking residence, and therefore the sages did not permit one to carry inside it as in a proper private domain. Rav Huna bar Hinana raised an objection from the following Bereta. With regard to a rock protruding from the sea that is 10 handbreadths high and 4 handbreadths wide, one may not carry from it to the sea or from the sea to it on Shabbat. The rock has the status of a private domain, while the sea is a carmelit, and it is prohibited to carry from a private domain into a carmelit or vice versa on Shabbat. If the rock is smaller than this, either in height or width, so that it is no longer considered a private domain, one may carry to or from it. How large may the rock be? It may be up to the size of 2 beit seah. The Gemara attempts to clarify the meaning of this Bereta. To which part of the Bereta is the clause, up to the size of 2 beit seah, referring? If you say it is referring to the latter clause, can it be that with regard to a rock that is less than 10 handbreadths high, The halakha is that carrying is permitted if the rock is up to the size of 2 beit seah, but no more than that. Wouldn't he be carrying from one carmelit to another, which is certainly permitted? Rather, is it not referring to the first clause of the Bereta? And this is what it is saying, with regard to a rock protruding from the sea that is 10 handbreadths high and 4 handbreadths wide. One may not carry from it to the sea or from the sea to it, as it has the status of a private domain. And how large may it be for this prohibition to apply? Up to the size of 2 beit seah. But if the rock is greater than the size of 2 beit seah, one may carry. Apparently, it is a carmelit in all respects, and not just as a stringency. This appears to be a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rabbi Yohanan. Rava said, only one who does not know how to explain Mishnayot raises such refutations against Rabbi Yohanan, one of the greatest sages of his generation. Rather, the Bereta is to be understood as follows. Actually, the final words of the Bereta refer to the first clause, and this is what it is saying. With regard to a rock protruding from the sea that is 10 handbreadths high and 4 handbreadths wide, one may not carry from it to the sea or from the sea to it, but within it, on the rock itself. One may carry, as it is considered a private domain. And how large may the rock be and remain permitted? Up to 2 beit seah. Rav Ashi said that the Bereta may be explained differently, yet still in a manner that does not refute the words of Rabbi Yohanan. Actually, the final words of the Bereta refer to the first clause, as stated by Rav Huna bar Hanina. However, one may not infer from them a principle with regard to enclosures, as they said that the halakha is stringent in one case, and they said that the halakha should be lenient in a different case, i.e., the same sages who were stringent in one case were lenient in the another. How so? They said that in the case of an enclosure greater than the size of 2 beit seah, that was not originally enclosed with a fence for the purpose of residence, one may carry only a distance of 4 cubits, as it has the status of a carmelit in this regard. And they also said that one may not carry from a private domain to a carmelit. Both of these halakot are decrees of the sages. Therefore, the sages developed the following principles. With regard to a rock that is no larger than 2 beit seah, so that it is permitted to carry on all of it. The sages prohibited carrying from the sea to it, and from it to the sea. What is the reason for this? It is that the rock is a full-fledged private domain, and they did not permit one to carry from a private domain to a carmelit, or vice versa. However, if it is larger than the size of 2 beit seah, so that it is prohibited to carry on all of it by rabbinic decree, the sages permitted carrying from the sea to it and from it to the sea. What is the reason for this? It is because the sages were concerned that perhaps people would say that it is a proper private domain, and they would come to carry on all of it. Were the sages to prohibit carrying from the rock to the sea, people would think that it is a full-fledged private domain, and they would carry on it. Since all these decrees are rabbinic in nature, the sages permitted carrying from a private domain to a carmelit. In this case, in order to prevent people from violating a different rabbinic decree, which prohibits carrying in an enclosure that is greater than the size of 2 beit seah. However, no general conclusion may be inferred from this that an enclosure larger than 2 beit seah is not a private domain by Torah law. The Gemara asks, and what is the difference between the decrees that cause the sages to choose to uphold the one decree and not the other? The Gemara answers, the difference is that carrying within the rock is common, whereas carrying from it to the sea and from the sea to it is not common. The sages permitted carrying in the less likely scenario in order to reinforce the decree against carrying within the rock, the more common situation. The Gemara now relates that there was once a certain baby whose warm water, which had been prepared for his Shabbat circumcision, spilled. Rabbah said to them, let them bring warm water for him from my house. Abai said to him, but we did not establish an Eruv in the courtyard, so it is prohibited to carry the water. Rabbah said to him, let us rely on the merging of alleyways, which may serve in place of a joining of courtyards in pressing circumstances such as these. Abai said to him, but we did not establish a merging of alleyways either. Rabbah replied, if so, let them instruct a Gentile to bring the warm water for him, even though it is generally prohibited to instruct a Gentile to perform labor for a Jew that involves a desecration of Shabbat. Abai said, I wanted to raise an objection against the master, Rabbah, but Rav Yosef would not let me do so. As Rav Yosef said that Rav Kahana said, when we were in Rav Yehuda's house, he would say to us when we were presented with a halakhic difficulty with regard to a Torah law, we first raise objections and then we perform an act. I.e., if someone has an objection to a proposed action, we must first clarify the matter, and only then may we proceed. However, with regard to rabbinic laws, we first perform an act, and then we raise objections. Afterward, when they had brought the water, Rav Yosef said to Abai, what objection did you wish to raise against the master, Rabbah? He said to him, as it was taught in a Bereta, sprinkling the water of purification on an impure person on Shabbat is not prohibited by Torah law. Rather, it is only a rabbinic decree to enhance the character of Shabbat as a day of rest, and telling a Gentile to perform a Shabbat labor on behalf of a Jew is likewise only a rabbinic decree.